Welcome back. So, honest question, do you believe in ghosts?
Or those things that go bump in the night?
Well, on land and at sea, there are things that can be just a little spooky for all of us. Take a look at this next story and see if you don't agree. She was the last pure sailing ship built by the U.S. Navy, commissioned from 1855 to 1955. But some say the ghost of sailors past have never really left the ship.
Most of the stories that we have were collected during the 60s and 70s, right after the ship first came to Baltimore. It first came here in 1955. One real interesting story we have is from the mid-60s, where this visitor came on board right at the end of the day. One of those last-minute visitors came in, and all of our guys were closing the museum up, ready to shut down for the day. And so the visitors are kind of making their way through and making their way out, and he was one of the last to leave, and he stops and tells our guide up here on deck that the gentleman down below, the guide who was down below, was real friendly and gave a real personal tour of the ship and had a lot of information about her history and just had a really great experience and wanted to thank that person. And so when the guys got together as they were closing up, they were like, so which one of you was dealing with that guy? And I was like, not me. And well, who was down below? Nobody. Nobody was down below. So it was just by himself talking to, we don't know. But we do have at least one historical account from the ship during its Civil War cruise to Europe. Our yeoman on board, who was a native of Maine, he was on board and he wrote into his diary all kinds of going things on and gossip, so it's a great source that we have. And he talks about, it was 1863, and down below, 2 decks down in the brig, there was one of our freedmen, a black sailor named Ike Simmons, who was down there locked up in the brig, and he had just received an additional 5 days, clapped in double irons, which means your hands are cuffed together and your legs are cuffed together and you basically can't really move. So he got extra sentencing because he'd been down there singing all night, even though the Marine Guard told him to knock it off. Now when you're down there in the brig, you're 2 decks down, nobody's down there except for storage. You're usually below the waterline, it's dark, the sound of the world is gone, so you're really alone down there. And so when you do things like sing or try to entertain yourself, that defeats the purpose of punishing you. So they told him to knock it off. And he claimed that outside his cell were the ghosts of 2 deceased sailors. They were fellow freed black sailors who had been serving, but they had died recently on board, and they were out there wanting to dance. And so he was singing them a jaunty tune, and everybody was kind of like, you're crazy, Ike. So they gave him his extra sentence. But then the ship's corporal reported that, you know, I don't know if I should say this, but when I went down there to tell him to knock it off, there was a stack of pots outside of his cell, about 4 or 5 high, just stacked up on deck. And he was in the cell, he couldn't have done it, and the ship's rocking and rolling and the stack of pots isn't tipping over. I don't know what that's about. So, and that comes right out of the diary from a guy who was on board here during the war. Sailors were a superstitious people, so you know, whether or not they actually see things in their mind or if they just like to make up stories to entertain their shipmates, we don't know, but it is down there in a documented primary source from the period. So as a historical professional, I can confidently tell you that story from a primary source.
Ooh, interesting.